Let me explain you something that many people underestimate about our modern world. Everything around us, the phone in your hand, the car you drive, the food in supermarkets, depends on one thing: energy. And with energy, I mean oil and gas, coal, and ultimately electricity, which is running our economies. Our economies are growth driven. Decrease in growth means recession. Recession results in inflation. Inflation, or let's say losing value of a currency by whatever reason, means losing power, and losing power can lead to war if military is existing. Oil and gas keeps the entire global system moving, but here's the problem. Most of the world's oil moves through very tiny narrow routes on our map. If one of those routes is blocked because of war, sanctions, or military conflict, the disruption spreads much faster than most people imagine. Ships stop moving, factories start slowing down, supply chains begin breaking, and suddenly something that started as a regional conflict or crisis turns into a global economic problem. And I call this the 100-day warning. China understands this risk very well. Over the past decades, the Chinese government built massive emergency oil reserves. The idea is simple. If a crisis interrupts global oil supply, China can keep its factories running for a while. But even these enormous reserves have limits. Under difficult conditions, China could keep its industrial system running for about 100 days without new oil imports. That's a little over 3 months. After that, the safety buffer disappears. So we have a countdown to zero. Now imagine what happens when the oil supply suddenly stops. China does not shut down their factories overnight. Trains continue transporting goods. Power plants keep producing electricity. But every day the country burns through its emergency reserves. Day by day the stockpiles shrink until eventually they reach zero. And when that moment arrives, the system can no longer keep running the way it used to. Manufacturing comes to a halt. China is often called the factory of the world. It produces a huge share of the products used across the planet. Phones, computers, clothing, car parts, industrial machinery. But factories need energy to operate. If fuel supplies run out, machines stop, production lines shut down, exports collapse, and suddenly the engine that powers the global manufacturing falls apart and silent. I call this the global domino effect, because what happens in China doesn't stay in China. A large part of the global economy depends on Chinese factories. Companies around the world rely on Chinese components and materials. If production there stops, shortages begin everywhere. Factories in other countries cannot get parts. Products disappear from shelves. And the economic shock spreads from one industry to another like falling dominoes. The reason this risk exists comes down to geography. A large portion of the world's oil travels through narrow maritime corridors. One of the most important is the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East. We know what's happening there at the moment. It's a relatively small stretch of water, but an enormous amount of global oil supply passes through it every single day. If conflicts blocks this route, oil exports from the region slow dramatically down. And this is representing 20% of the global oil supply. Countries that depend heavily on imported energy suddenly face serious shortages. There is another important detail most people never hear about. China has built many refineries designed specifically to produce heavy crude oil from Venezuela. We know what happened in Venezuela. This type of oil is very thick and chemically different from most other crude oils. Refineries are built to handle certain oil types. That means China cannot simply switch supplies overnight, since those refineries are specifically created for this type of oil. Replacing Venezuelan oil with another type requires major adjustments to refinery infrastructure, something that can take years. So if Venezuelan oil disappears from the market, the replacement is not immediate. Since the US took over Venezuela, 400 to 700,000 barrels of oil per day are uncertain for China. The geopolitical trigger is coming. Now imagine several geopolitical events happening at the same time, and that's what's exactly happening at the moment. A conflict disrupts Venezuelan oil exports. We experienced this scenario in January this year. At the same time, tensions rise in the Middle East, shipping routes become unstable, and the Strait of Hormuz faces military escalation. Suddenly, several major oil supply lines are under pressure. For a country that depends heavily on importing energy, this creates a very dangerous situation. China depends not only on Venezuelan oil, but as well on Iranian oil and Russian oil. Leave me a comment how you think China will react on such situation. Venezuela taken over, Russia in war with Europe, Iran under fire. What will an economy like China do next? If disruption like this continue for months, the consequences begin spreading across the global economy. Energy shortages slow down factories. Oil prices rise, at the moment $120. Manufacturing declines, global supply chains begin breaking apart. Prices rise, markets react with uncertainty. What began as a geopolitical disruption slowly becomes a worldwide economic shock, because in the modern world, energy is the foundation that keeps everything running. And when that foundation starts to crack, the entire system begins to feel the pressure. On a geopolitical standpoint, we could now think that America, as the leading superpower, is not focusing on Venezuela or Iran, rather than its main enemy, China, who is the new rising superpower. I leave this thought to you. What we definitely see is a massive shift in geopolitics, and such shifts always ended in global conflicts. Therefore, we need to be prepared. The flag theory is a good guide how to protect your assets and how to diversify them in uncertain times. A free webinar is available in the description below. In the meantime, stay safe.